The sun hadn't yet burned through the morning haze at Langley Air Force Base when Staff Sergeant Kestrel Nakamura raised her orange marshalling wands for what she assumed would be another routine aircraft parking procedure. The F-22 Raptor descended through the Virginia sky like a metallic predator, its angular stealth geometry cutting through wisps of cloud with an almost supernatural grace. What neither she nor the incoming pilot could have predicted was that this ordinary Tuesday would unravel a mystery buried in classified files for over a decade. The Raptor's engines wound down to a whisper as Kestrel guided the aircraft toward the designated parking spot with practiced precision. Her movements were fluid, economical, the result of 8 years directing some of the world's most advanced fighter jets to safe harbor. Ground crew members often joked that she could park an F-35 in a closet if asked, but there was something different about her technique that morning. Her usually steady hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she watched the canopy begin to rise. Captain Marcus Volkov emerged from the cockpit, his helmet reflecting the amber glow of runway lights still burning in the early dawn. He'd flown combat missions over 3 continents, logged over 2,000 flight hours in the Raptor, and considered himself unshakable. But as he climbed down from the aircraft and began his post-flight inspection, something in the maintenance log caught his attention. There, written in faded ink from a previous mission entry, was a name that made his blood freeze. Captain K. Nakamura, Mission Commander, Operation Silent Thunder. The name belonged to a ghost story whispered in ready rooms across the Air Force. A female pilot who had supposedly pulled off an impossible mission deep in enemy territory, then vanished from all official records. The military brass claimed no such person existed, that Silent Thunder was classified fiction designed to boost morale. Yet here was her signature, her call sign, Nighthawk, scrawled beneath mission parameters that shouldn't have existed on any maintenance log. Volkov's eyes moved from the logbook to the woman still standing on the tarmac, methodically coiling her marshalling wands. The staff sergeant's nameplate read, K. Nakamura. His hands went cold despite the Virginia heat beginning to build. The woman who had just guided his aircraft to safety wasn't just any ground crew member. She was the pilot every aviator had heard about but none believed existed. In that moment, as Kestrel turned to walk away from the aircraft she'd just parked, Captain Volkov realized he was looking at a legend who had been hiding in plain sight, reduced to directing traffic for the same type of aircraft she had once commanded in the world's most dangerous airspace. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of mist, but the mystery that had just surfaced would prove far more persistent than any weather pattern. What had happened to Captain Kestrel Nighthawk Nakamura? And why was one of the Air Force's most decorated combat pilots now working as ground crew, forgotten by the very service she had once served with unparalleled distinction? Volkov closed the maintenance log slowly, his mind racing. The signature was definitely hers. He'd seen enough classified briefings to recognize the distinctive script. But the date on the entry was from 2013, during a mission that officially never happened. His training told him to walk away, file his routine post-flight report, and forget what he'd seen. But his conscience, and a growing sense that something fundamentally wrong had occurred, wouldn't allow him to ignore the evidence in his hands. The base continued its morning routine around them. Jets taxied toward runways, ground crews performed their choreographed maintenance dances, and the controlled chaos of military aviation proceeded without pause. Yet for Volkov, everything had changed. The woman walking away from his aircraft represented more than just an administrative mystery. She was proof that the Air Force's most legendary mission, one that had supposedly never existed, was absolutely real. As Kestrel disappeared into the maze of hangars and support buildings, Volkov made a decision that would ultimately expose one of the military's most closely guarded secrets. He would find out what had happened to Captain Nighthawk, even if it meant challenging a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Air Force Command. The morning that had started with a routine landing was about to become the beginning of the most important investigation of his career. The investigation began that afternoon in the base library, where Volkov spent his off-duty hours poring over archived flight records and mission reports. What he discovered was a pattern of deliberate omissions. References to Operation Silent Thunder appeared in fragmentary form across dozens of documents, but always with key details redacted or missing entirely. Personnel records showed gaps where Captain K. Nakamura's service history should have been, as if someone had surgically removed her existence from official documentation. 3 days into his research, Volkov received an unexpected visitor. Chief Master Sergeant Raymond Torres, a man whose weathered face suggested he'd seen everything the Air Force could offer, appeared at Volkov's workstation without warning. "Captain," Torres said quietly, settling into the adjacent chair, "heard you've been asking questions about Operation Silent Thunder." Volkov's instinct was to deny the inquiry, but something in Torres' expression suggested the older man wasn't there to discourage his investigation. "What do you know about it, Chief?" "More than I should," Torres replied, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "I was the crew chief on Nakamura's bird during that operation. What I'm about to tell you never leaves this room, understood?" The story Torres revealed over the next hour painted a picture of extraordinary heroism, deliberately buried by bureaucratic cowardice. In 2013, Captain Kestrel Nakamura had volunteered for a mission that required her to penetrate heavily defended airspace to extract a downed intelligence officer, whose capture would have compromised ongoing operations across an entire theater. The mission parameters were deemed impossible by senior command, but Nakamura had insisted it could be accomplished using experimental stealth modifications and unprecedented tactical approaches. "She flew that F-22 like it was part of her nervous system," Torres recalled, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and sadness. "Threaded the needle through Sam's sights that should have blown her out of the sky. Brought our guy home when everyone else had given up on him." But the mission's success had come with political complications. The rescue had been conducted in airspace where American forces officially weren't operating, during a diplomatic period when such operations could have sparked international incidents. Rather than celebrate Nakamura's achievement, senior leadership had decided the mission had never happened. The rescued officer was debriefed and transferred to a different theater. All records were classified beyond normal security levels. And Captain Nighthawk was quietly transferred to a position where her skills would be wasted, but her silence could be maintained. "They broke her spirit deliberately," Torres continued. "Took away everything that made her who she was. The woman you see now is a shadow of the pilot who saved American lives that night." Volkov felt anger building in his chest. Why didn't anyone speak up? Why didn't you report what really happened? Tor's expression hardened. "You think we didn't try? 3 of us filed complaints through proper channels. 2 got transferred to bases in locations that don't appear on tourist brochures. The 3rd took early retirement after his security clearance mysteriously disappeared. The message was clear: forget Nighthawk ever existed, or join her in obscurity." The conversation left Volkov with a profound sense of injustice, but also with a clearer understanding of the forces he was challenging. This wasn't simply a case of administrative error or bureaucratic oversight. Someone in the chain of command had deliberately destroyed Captain Nakamura's career to protect their own political interests. The question now was whether anyone with sufficient authority cared enough about justice to correct a decade-old wrong. That evening, Volkov found himself in the base commissary, studying Kestrel Nakamura from across the dining hall. She sat alone, methodically eating a simple meal while reading what appeared to be a technical manual. Her posture suggested someone who had learned to make herself invisible, to avoid drawing the attention that had once made her one of the Air Force's rising stars. Yet even in her deliberate anonymity, there were hints of the pilot she had once been. Her eyes tracked aircraft sounds automatically, Her hands moved with the precise economy of someone trained to operate complex machinery, and her bearing retained the subtle confidence that marked those who had faced death and emerged victorious. Volkov approached her table with carefully rehearsed casualness. "Mind if I sit? The place is pretty crowded tonight." Kestrel looked up from her manual, her expression neutral but alert. "Sure, Captain, though I think there are plenty of other tables available." "Call me Marcus," he said, settling into the opposite chair. "I wanted to thank you for the excellent aircraft marshalling this morning. That was some of the most precise ground handling I've experienced." "Just doing my job," she replied, but something in her eyes suggested she sensed this conversation was heading somewhere beyond pleasantries. "I'm curious," Volkov continued carefully. "How long have you been working ground crew? Seems like someone with your attention to detail might have other skills." Kestrel closed her manual slowly. "Captain Volkov, if you have something specific you want to discuss, I'd prefer you say it directly. I've been in the Air Force long enough to recognize when someone is fishing for information." Her directness surprised him, but it also confirmed his suspicion that the staff sergeant sitting across from him was far more than she appeared to be. "All right. I found your signature in my aircraft's maintenance log, from a mission that officially never happened. I'd like to know why one of the Air Force's most decorated pilots is directing traffic instead of flying combat missions." For a moment, Kestrel's carefully maintained composure cracked. Her eyes betrayed a flash of pain, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. "I think you have me confused with someone else, Captain. I'm ground crew. I've always been ground crew." "Nighthawk," Volkov said quietly. The single word hit her like a physical blow. Her hands tightened on the table edge, and for several seconds she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice carried years of suppressed anguish. "That call sign is retired. Permanently." "Why?" Volkov pressed. "What happened during Operation Silent Thunder that was so threatening they had to erase your entire existence?" Kestrel stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Some questions are too dangerous to answer, Captain, for everyone involved." As she walked away, leaving her dinner unfinished and her manual behind, Volkov realized he had crossed a line from which there might be no return. But he also understood that Kestrel Nakamura's story was far from over. The pilot who had once been willing to risk everything to save a fellow service member was still there, buried beneath years of institutional betrayal. The question was whether she still had the courage to fight one more battle, this time for her own redemption. The following morning brought an unexpected development. Volkov arrived at his squadron ready room to find a message waiting in his secure communication folder. The sender was listed as anonymous, but the content suggested someone with access to highly classified information and a personal stake in Nakamura's story. "Captain Volkov," the message read, "your inquiries regarding Silent Thunder have been noted. If you wish to understand the full scope of what was done to Captain Nakamura, meet me at Hangar 7 after evening briefings. Come alone and tell no one. There are forces at work here that extend far beyond base-level politics. The pilot you know as Nighthawk is the key to exposing corruption that reaches the Pentagon itself." Volkov read the message 3 times before deleting it, his mind racing with possibilities. Someone else knew the truth about Nakamura's situation, someone with enough access to send encrypted messages through secure channels. But the cloak and dagger nature of the communication also suggested genuine danger. He was no longer dealing with simple bureaucratic injustice. There were people in positions of power who had committed career-ending acts to bury Nakamura's story, and they wouldn't hesitate to protect themselves by destroying anyone who threatened to expose them. That afternoon's flight training took on a surreal quality as Volkov struggled to focus on routine maneuvers, while his mind churned through the implications of what he had learned. His F-22 responded to his inputs with mechanical precision, but he found himself wondering what it had been like for Nakamura to push this same aircraft beyond all known performance parameters during her legendary mission. The technical specifications suggested that what she had accomplished should have been impossible, yet multiple sources confirmed it had happened exactly as described. During the post-flight debrief, Squadron Commander Colonel Patricia Hammond noticed Volkov's distraction. "Marcus, you seem to have something on your mind. Want to share it with the class?" "Just thinking about operational limits, Colonel. How far we can push these aircraft when circumstances require it." Hammond's expression sharpened slightly. The F-22 is designed to operate within specific parameters for excellent reasons. Pilots who try to exceed those limits tend to create problems for everyone involved. The comment felt like a warning, though Volkov couldn't be certain whether Hammond was speaking generally about aircraft operations or specifically about his investigation into Nakamura's past. Either way, the message was clear. Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. Evening briefings concluded with routine updates on weather conditions and airspace restrictions. As the other pilots filed out of the briefing room, Volkov lingered, checking his watch repeatedly. Hangar 7 was a maintenance facility on the far side of the base, used primarily for long-term aircraft storage and specialized modifications. It was also isolated enough that a clandestine meeting could occur without casual observation. The walk across the base took 15 minutes, during which Volkov encountered only routine security patrols and maintenance personnel heading home from their shifts. Hangar 7 loomed against the night sky like a metallic cathedral, its massive doors sealed and its windows dark except for a single light burning in what appeared to be an office area. Volkov approached the personnel entrance cautiously, unsure what he would find. The door was unlocked, opening onto a corridor that led deeper into the hangar complex. His footsteps echoed in the empty space as he followed the sound of voices toward the lighted office. What he discovered there would fundamentally alter his understanding of Nakamura's situation and his own role in what was rapidly becoming a much larger conspiracy than he had initially suspected. The office contained 3 people: Chief Master Sergeant Torres, whom Volkov recognized from their library conversation, a woman in civilian clothes whose bearing suggested military background despite her outfit, and to his surprise, Staff Sergeant Kestrel Nakamura herself. All 3 looked up as he entered, their expressions grave but determined. "Captain Volkov," the civilian woman said, rising to greet him. "Thank you for coming. I'm Detective Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Air Force Office of Special Investigations. I've been investigating irregularities in Operation Silent Thunder for the past 2 years." "OSI?" Volkov felt his stomach tighten. The Office of Special Investigations handled internal crimes and security breaches. Their involvement suggested this situation was far more serious than he had realized. "Sit down, Marcus," Torres said, gesturing toward an empty chair. "What you're about to hear is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about how the Air Force operates." Nakamura spoke for the first time since Volkov's arrival. "Before we begin, Captain, I need you to understand something. Once you hear what we have to say, you'll be as committed to this investigation as we are. There won't be any going back to your normal routine. Are you prepared for that?" Looking at the 3 faces surrounding him, Volkov realized he had reached a point of no return. Whatever had happened to Captain Nighthawk was about to become his responsibility as well. The comfortable fiction that the military always took care of its own was about to be shattered by evidence of systematic betrayal that reached levels he had never imagined. "I'm here," he said simply. "Tell me everything." Detective Lieutenant Chen opened a thick folder and spread photographs across the table. The images showed aircraft modifications, technical schematics, and mission planning documents that bore classification markings Volkov had never seen before. "Operation Silent Thunder wasn't just a rescue mission," she began. "It was a field test for experimental stealth technology that the Pentagon planned to sell to foreign allies." Captain Nakamura's mission was designed to demonstrate capabilities that would be worth billions in defense contracts. The rescue was real, Nakamura interjected, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Master Sergeant Collins was definitely in enemy hands, and he definitely needed extraction. But our intelligence sources were feeding us information that served multiple purposes. My mission wasn't just about saving Collins. It was about proving that modified F-22s could operate in denied airspace with complete impunity. Torres leaned forward, his expression grim. The modifications worked perfectly. Too perfectly. Nakamura's aircraft performed beyond all projections, penetrating defenses that should have been impossible to breach. But when she returned from the mission, certain people realized they had a problem. What kind of problem? Volkov asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. The kind that occurs when successful weapons demonstrations threaten to expose illegal arms deals, Chen replied. The stealth modifications used on Nakamura's aircraft incorporated technology stolen from other defense contractors. The Pentagon officials who authorized the operation were planning to sell capabilities they didn't legally own. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place in Volkov's mind. Nakamura hadn't been silenced because her mission was unsuccessful. She had been destroyed because it had succeeded too completely, exposing criminal activity at the highest levels of military procurement. Her extraordinary piloting skills had inadvertently revealed corruption worth hundreds of millions of dollars. When Captain Nakamura filed her after-action report, Chen continued, she included technical details about aircraft performance that would have led to questions about the modifications, questions that certain people couldn't allow to be asked. So they buried everything, Volkov said. The mission, the technology, and the pilot. Not just buried, Nakamura corrected, her voice carrying years of suppressed anger. Destroyed. They took my flight status, my security clearance, my entire career. Then they transferred me to a position where I'd be visible enough to monitor but powerless to cause problems. The revelation hit Volkov like a physical blow. The Air Force he had devoted his career to serving had betrayed one of its most capable officers to protect criminals in positions of authority. The institutional culture he had believed in was revealed as a facade concealing systematic corruption. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "What's changed?" Chen smiled for the first time since his arrival, though her expression remained serious. "What's changed, Captain, is that we finally have evidence that can't be ignored or suppressed. Master Sergeant Collins, the man Captain Nakamura rescued, kept detailed records of his debriefing sessions. Records that document exactly what technology was used during his extraction and who authorized its deployment." She pulled a digital tablet from her briefcase and displayed a document that made Volkov's hands tremble as he read it. Collins had indeed kept meticulous notes about his rescue, including technical observations about his rescuer's aircraft that corroborated everything Nakamura had reported in her buried after-action report. "Collins died in a training accident 6 months after his rescue," Torres said quietly. "But before his death, he gave copies of his notes to his wife, with instructions to release them if anything happened to him. She's been carrying that burden for 10 years, waiting for someone with enough authority to act on the information." "And now," Volkov asked, "now we have a congressional oversight committee that's finally willing to investigate defense procurement irregularities," Chen replied. "But they need a serving officer with impeccable credentials to testify about what really happened during Silent Thunder, someone whose word cannot be dismissed or discredited." The implication was clear. They wanted Volkov to risk his career by testifying about events he had only learned about through unofficial channels. It was a request that could destroy his future in the Air Force, but it was also an opportunity to restore justice for a pilot who had been wronged by the very institution she had served with distinction. Looking across the table at Nakamura, Volkov saw something he hadn't noticed before. Despite everything that had been done to her, despite 10 years of deliberate humiliation and waste, the pilot was still there. Her eyes held the same fierce intelligence that had allowed her to accomplish an impossible mission, and her posture suggested someone ready to fight one final battle for vindication. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. The smile that crossed Nakamura's face was the first genuine expression of hope he had seen from her. "Help me get my wings back," she said simply, "and help make sure this never happens to another pilot." The meeting lasted until well past midnight, with Chen outlining a careful strategy for exposing the Silent Thunder conspiracy while protecting everyone involved from retaliation. The plan required precise timing, absolute secrecy, and considerable courage from all participants. But for the first time in 10 years, Captain Kestrel Nighthawk Nakamura had allies willing to fight for justice on her behalf. As they prepared to leave the hangar, Volkov found himself walking beside the woman whose reputation had become legend among combat pilots. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said quietly. "Depends on how personal," she replied, but her tone suggested she was willing to listen. "Why did you stay? Why didn't you leave the Air Force after they destroyed your career?" Nakamura was quiet for several steps before answering. "Because leaving would have meant they won completely. As long as I'm here, as long as I'm wearing the uniform, I'm proof that their version of events isn't the whole truth. I've been waiting 10 years for someone to ask the right questions. I wasn't about to give up when that moment finally came." Her answer revealed the true measure of her character. Captain Nighthawk had endured a decade of professional exile not out of resignation, but out of determination. She had maintained her position not because she had accepted defeat, but because she had never stopped fighting for eventual vindication. The next morning brought the beginning of the most dangerous phase of their investigation. Chen had arranged for congressional staff members to conduct preliminary interviews with key witnesses, but the process required careful coordination to avoid alerting the Pentagon officials who had orchestrated the original cover-up. Any premature disclosure could result in evidence being destroyed and witnesses being silenced or transferred. Volkov reported for his regular flight duties while carrying the weight of knowledge that made routine activities feel surreal. During pre-flight briefings, he found himself studying his fellow pilots' faces, wondering how they would react if they knew that one of the Air Force's greatest heroes was working as ground crew just a few hundred meters away. The cognitive dissonance between the military's public values and its private actions created a constant sense of unease. 3 days into the congressional phase of their investigation, Volkov received orders that made his blood run cold. He was being transferred to Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, effective immediately. The reassignment came without explanation, and with timing that couldn't possibly be coincidental. "They know," Torres said when Volkov called to report the development. "Someone leaked information about our activities." "What about Nakamura?" Volkov asked. "Is she safe?" "For now. But if you disappear to North Dakota, the congressional investigation loses its primary military witness. We need to accelerate our timeline." That evening, Chen convened an emergency meeting in a different location, a coffee shop off base, where their conversation could be hidden among civilian background noise. The news she brought was both encouraging and terrifying. "The Oversight Committee is willing to convene emergency hearings," she reported, "but they need Captain Nakamura's testimony within 72 hours. After that, political pressure will force them to abandon the investigation." Nakamura had been quiet throughout the meeting, but now she looked directly at Volkov. "I can't do this without corroborating testimony from a current pilot. If you take that transfer to Minot, the story dies with me." Volkov understood the choice he faced. Following orders meant abandoning Nakamura and allowing a decade-old injustice to remain buried forever. Defying orders meant risking court-martial and the end of his own military career. but it also meant giving voice to truth that had been silenced too long. "When do we testify?" he asked. The congressional hearing room was smaller than Volkov had expected, but the weight of the proceedings made the space feel enormous. 5 committee members sat behind an elevated desk, their expressions suggesting they understood the significance of what they were about to hear. Behind them, photographers and reporters documented every moment for a public that had no idea they were about to learn about one of the military's most closely guarded secrets. Captain Kestrel Nakamura entered the room wearing her dress uniform for the first time in over a decade. The ribbons and decorations on her chest told the story of a distinguished career that had been deliberately obscured by bureaucratic manipulation. But more impressive than her medals was her bearing, the confident posture of someone who had finally been given the opportunity to tell her truth. Volkov testified first, establishing his credentials and explaining how he had discovered evidence of the Silent Thunder cover-up. His testimony was technical and precise, laying the groundwork for what was to follow. But when Committee Chair Congressman Robert Martinez called Captain Nakamura to the witness table, the atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. "Captain Nakamura," Martinez began, "you are testifying under oath today about events that officially never occurred. Can you explain this apparent contradiction?" "Yes, Congressman," Nakamura replied, her voice carrying across the room with absolute clarity. "Operation Silent Thunder occurred exactly as I described in my after-action report dated November 15, 2013. The mission involved the combat rescue of Master Sergeant David Collins from hostile territory using an F-22 Raptor equipped with experimental stealth modifications. The operation succeeded completely, but was subsequently classified beyond normal security levels to conceal illegal activities by Pentagon procurement officials." Her testimony continued for 3 hours, methodically documenting every aspect of her mission and its aftermath. She described aircraft modifications that violated multiple defense contracts, explained how her success had inadvertently exposed criminal activity worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and detailed the systematic destruction of her career that had followed. The committee members asked pointed questions that revealed they had conducted extensive background research. Documents that had been classified for over a decade were entered into the official record. Technical specifications for illegal modifications were read aloud in a public forum. The entire Silent Thunder conspiracy was exposed with surgical precision. But the most powerful moment came when Congressman Martinez asked about the personal cost of her ordeal. "Captain Nakamura," he said quietly, "you have served your country with extraordinary distinction. You risked your life to save a fellow service member under impossible circumstances. How do you feel about the way you have been treated by the institution you served so faithfully?" For the first time during her testimony, Nakamura's composure wavered slightly. When she spoke, her voice carried years of suppressed pain but also unbroken determination. "Congressman, I joined the Air Force because I believed in its mission and its values. Nothing that has happened to me has changed that belief. The actions of a few corrupt officials do not define the institution as a whole, but those actions cannot be allowed to stand uncorrected. Too many good people have paid the price for protecting criminals who wore the uniform they dishonored." The hearing concluded with Chairman Martinez's promise of swift action. Within hours, news outlets across the country were reporting on the Silent Thunder revelations. Pentagon officials who had orchestrated the cover-up were suspended pending full investigation. Congressional appropriations for defense contracts were frozen until oversight procedures could be strengthened. But for Volkov, the most significant moment came as they left the Capitol building. Captain Nakamura paused on the steps, looking up at the sky where a formation of F-16s from Andrews Air Force Base was conducting a routine training flight. 10 years, she said quietly. 10 years since I've been allowed to do what I was born to do." "That's about to change," Volkov replied. The Air Force is going to need good pilots like you to rebuild its reputation." Nakamura smiled, the first completely unguarded expression of joy he had seen from her. "Captain Volkov, I think you mean good pilots like us. This fight isn't over yet." The aftermath of their testimony moved with surprising speed. Within 2 weeks, the Pentagon announced a comprehensive review of all defense procurement procedures. 7 officials were formally charged with fraud and conspiracy. The experimental stealth modifications from Operation Silent Thunder were declassified and incorporated into legitimate development programs. Most importantly for Nakamura, she received notification that her flight status was being restored immediately, with full back pay and retroactive promotions to reflect the career advancement she had been denied. The Air Force also issued a formal apology for the injustice she had endured, though everyone involved understood that words could never fully compensate for 10 years of professional exile. Her return to flight status was celebrated throughout the aviation community, but Nakamura approached it with characteristic professionalism rather than fanfare. She completed her requalification training with scores that reminded everyone why she had once been considered one of the Air Force's most promising pilots. Her first official flight in over a decade was a routine training mission, but for her, it represented something far more significant: the restoration of identity that had been stolen from her. Volkov, meanwhile, found his own career enhanced rather than destroyed by his role in exposing the conspiracy. His willingness to risk everything for justice earned him respect throughout the military hierarchy and assignment to positions of increasing responsibility. But he never forgot that his opportunities had come at the cost of another officer's sacrificed decade. 6 months after the congressional hearing, both pilots found themselves assigned to the same squadron at Nellis Air Force Base, where they worked together on advanced tactical development programs. The partnership that had begun with a chance discovery in a maintenance log had evolved into a professional relationship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to institutional integrity. The final phase of Kestrel Nakamura's redemption came not through official recognition or career advancement, but through the quiet acknowledgement of her peers. In ready rooms and briefing halls across the Air Force, her call sign, Nighthawk, was spoken again with the reverence it had always deserved. Young pilots who had grown up hearing whispered stories about Operation Silent Thunder learned that their hero was real, that she was still serving, and that her example of courage and persistence remained as relevant as ever. On a clear Tuesday morning exactly 1 year after Captain Volkov had first discovered her signature in his aircraft's maintenance log, Kestrel Nakamura stood on the Nellis flight line, preparing for a mission that would test new tactical procedures she had developed. The F-22 waiting for her was equipped with legitimate stealth modifications that incorporated lessons learned from her legendary flight a decade earlier. As she completed her pre-flight inspection, other pilots gathered to watch Nighthawk return to the sky she had never really left. Their presence wasn't about spectacle or ceremony. It was about witnessing the restoration of something that should never have been taken away. Volkov stood among them, remembering the broken woman who had once guided his aircraft to parking while hiding her true identity. That person was gone, replaced by someone who had been tested by injustice and emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever to the values that defined the profession they shared. Tower, Nighthawk 1 requesting taxi for departure. Nakamura's voice crackled through the radio, calm and professional. Nighthawk 1 taxi approved. Welcome back, Captain. The F-22 rolled toward the runway, its pilot finally free to do what she had always been meant to do. Behind her, she left a decade of silence and suppression. Ahead lay the infinite sky that had always been her true home. The aircraft lifted off with effortless grace, climbing toward the Nevada sun until it became just another speck in the vast blue expanse. But everyone watching knew they had witnessed something more significant than a routine departure. They had seen justice restored, truth vindicated, and a warrior reclaim her rightful place among the eagles. Captain Kestrel Nighthawk Nakamura was flying again, and in ready rooms across the Air Force, young pilots would continue to hear her story, not as a legend or a ghost tale, but as proof that courage, persistence, and integrity could overcome even the most entrenched corruption. The sky had waited patiently for her return. Now it would never let her go again.